August 30th, 2025, Caribbean Sea. The morning sun blazed over the Caribbean as 8 U.S. Navy warships cut through the turquoise waters toward Venezuela. Their mission, according to official Pentagon briefings, was enhanced counter-narcotics operations. But the fleet's composition told a different story entirely. At the formation's heart steamed the USS San Antonio, a massive amphibious transport dock carrying 2,200 Marines and their combat equipment. Flanking the transport were 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Paul Ignatius and USS Thomas Hudner, their vertical launch systems loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles. The guided missile cruiser, USS Normandy, provided area air defense with its advanced Aegis combat system. While somewhere beneath the waves, the attack submarine USS Colorado prowled silently with its arsenal of torpedoes and land attack missiles. Admiral Rebecca Torres, commanding the Joint Task Force from aboard the Normandy, reviewed intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture. The Maduro regime had effectively collapsed 6 months earlier, leaving Venezuela in the hands of competing criminal organizations. But one cartel had emerged dominant: Cartel de los Mares, led by the enigmatic former Venezuelan Navy officer, Captain Eduardo El Tiburón Vázquez. Vázquez had done something unprecedented in cartel history. He had unified criminal organizations across Colombia, Venezuela, and parts of Brazil into a single narco-state. More dangerously, he had acquired sophisticated military equipment through black market arms dealers, including anti-ship missiles, attack helicopters, and even decommissioned warships from various sources. The cartel's most alarming acquisition was a small fleet of fast attack craft and submarines, some purchased from corrupt officials, others built in hidden shipyards using plans obtained through espionage. Intelligence suggested that Cartel de los Mares now controlled maritime drug trafficking routes worth over $200 billion annually, while maintaining a private military force of nearly 15,000 fighters. This is Navy warfare. If you want to see how America's most advanced naval force prepares to take on the world's most dangerous cartel, smash that like button and subscribe for exclusive military analysis. What transformed this from a law enforcement issue into a military operation was the cartel's declaration of war against U.S. interdiction efforts. Over the past 3 months, Vázquez's forces had attacked Coast Guard cutters, sunk DEA patrol boats, and most provocatively, fired anti-ship missiles at U.S. Navy vessels conducting routine patrols. The final straw came on August 15th, when a cartel submarine torpedoed the Coast Guard cutter Hamilton, killing 18 American sailors. The attack, captured on satellite imagery and later broadcast on social media by the cartel, represented the first successful submarine attack against a U.S. vessel since World War II. President Johnson's response was immediate and overwhelming. The United States will not tolerate attacks on our military personnel by criminal organizations, he declared during a nationally televised address. We will pursue these terrorists to their strongholds and eliminate their capacity to threaten American lives. But the mission's scope extended far beyond counter-narcotics. Intelligence reports confirmed that Cartel de los Mares had effectively occupied most of Venezuela's Caribbean coastline, establishing fortified bases in former government facilities. The cartel controlled ports, airfields, and oil infrastructure, using revenue from both drug trafficking and petroleum smuggling to fund its military buildup. Colonel Sarah Martinez, commanding the Marine Expeditionary Unit aboard the San Antonio, studied reconnaissance images of cartel positions. "This isn't just about drug interdiction anymore," she briefed her officers. "We're looking at a heavily armed criminal organization that has essentially conquered a failed state. They have surface-to-air missiles, coastal defense systems, and naval assets. This is going to be a real fight." The cartel's defensive preparations were extensive and sophisticated. Former Venezuelan military officers had helped establish overlapping fields of fire along likely landing beaches. Chinese-manufactured anti-ship missiles, purchased through intermediaries, were positioned to threaten approaching naval forces. Most concerning were reports of chemical weapons, not for use against military targets, but as terror weapons against civilian populations, should U.S. forces attempt to occupy cartel territory. As the Naval Task Force approached Venezuelan waters, cartel surveillance networks tracked their movement. Fishing boats equipped with satellite communication systems reported American positions. Civilian aircraft, often carrying drugs but also serving as reconnaissance platforms, maintained visual contact with the fleet. The element of surprise had been lost, but Admiral Torres knew that overwhelming firepower could compensate for tactical disadvantage. The first indication that this would be unlike previous military operations came from electronic warfare specialists. Cartel forces were employing sophisticated jamming equipment, disrupting GPS navigation and satellite communications. Intelligence suggested that former Eastern European military contractors were advising cartel forces on electronic warfare tactics developed during recent conflicts. At 14:30 hours, the fleet reached its operational area approximately 50 nautical miles off the Venezuelan coast. Immediately, the ships began detecting radar emissions from shore-based surveillance systems. More ominously, sonar operators reported multiple submarine contacts. The cartel's underwater fleet was moving to intercept. Lieutenant Commander David Chen, commanding the USS Colorado, received targeting data on 3 suspected cartel submarines. "These aren't military-grade boats," he reported to Admiral Torres, "but they're armed with torpedoes and mines. In shallow coastal waters, they could still pose a significant threat to our amphibious operations." The strategic implications of the operation extended far beyond Venezuela. Success would demonstrate American resolve to combat transnational criminal organizations that had acquired military capabilities. Failure could embolden similar groups worldwide and potentially destabilize the entire Caribbean region. Chinese and Iranian intelligence services watched the developing situation with keen interest. Both nations had extensive economic interests in Venezuela and had maintained relationships with various criminal organizations for intelligence and commercial purposes. While neither government officially supported the cartels, their intelligence agencies saw opportunities to study American military capabilities in action. Want to see how the U.S. Navy adapts its tactics to fight non-state actors with military-grade weapons? Hit subscribe and the notification bell to stay updated on Navy warfare's exclusive coverage. At 1600 hours, the first shots of Operation Caribbean Storm were fired. A cartel fast attack craft armed with anti-ship missiles attempted to engage the destroyer USS Paul Ignatius from extreme range. The ship's phalanx close-in weapon system engaged the incoming missile, destroying it with a burst of 20mm rounds. The destroyer immediately counterattacked with a Harpoon anti-ship missile, obliterating the cartel vessel in a massive explosion visible from the Venezuelan coast. But the cartel's response demonstrated their tactical sophistication. Instead of engaging in direct confrontation with superior U.S. naval forces, they implemented an asymmetric strategy designed to inflict maximum casualties while preserving their core capabilities. Suicide boats loaded with explosives began approaching the American fleet from multiple directions, forcing defensive systems to engage numerous low-value targets simultaneously. The USS Thomas Hudner found itself under attack from 6 explosive-laden speedboats operating in coordination. The ship's defensive systems worked perfectly, destroying all attacking craft before they could reach effective range. But the engagement consumed significant ammunition and revealed the cartel's willingness to sacrifice personnel for minimal tactical gain. Admiral Torres recognized that traditional naval tactics would be insufficient against an opponent employing terrorist methods with military equipment. "We're not fighting another navy," she observed during a secure conference call with Pentagon officials. "We're fighting a criminal organization with naval capabilities. The rules of engagement are different, and so must be our tactics." The most concerning development came from intelligence reports indicating that cartel forces were preparing to use civilian infrastructure as shields. Oil refineries, populated areas, and critical infrastructure were being fortified and defended by criminal fighters who showed no regard for civilian casualties. As evening approached, the American fleet prepared for the most challenging phase of the operation. Marine landing forces would assault fortified cartel positions, while naval forces provided fire support and maintained sea control. But unlike previous amphibious operations, the enemy possessed modern anti-access weapons and demonstrated complete disregard for internationally accepted rules of warfare. Colonel Martinez addressed her Marines via closed-circuit television from the San Antonio's hangar deck. "We're about to face an enemy that combines military equipment with criminal ruthlessness," she explained. "They will use human shields, chemical weapons, and suicide attacks. But they are not soldiers. They are criminals who have declared war on the United States of America, and we will show them the price of that declaration." The night of August 30th, 2025, would mark the beginning of the first major U.S. military operation against a transnational criminal organization possessing military-grade capabilities. The outcome would determine not only the fate of Venezuela's criminal occupation, but also establish precedents for how democratic nations would respond to the militarization of organized crime in the 21st century. As darkness fell over the Caribbean, both sides prepared for a confrontation that would test the limits of conventional military doctrine against an unconventional but heavily armed opponent. The stakes extended far beyond Venezuela's coastline. The entire Western Hemisphere was watching to see whether criminal organizations could successfully challenge American military power through the acquisition of modern weapons and terrorist tactics. This is how modern naval warfare evolves to meet 21st century threats. Subscribe to Navy Warfare and hit that bell icon for exclusive analysis of military operations against non-state actors. The success or failure of Operation Caribbean Storm would influence military planning, international law, and regional security arrangements for decades to come. As American sailors and Marines prepared for battle against the world's most powerful criminal organization, the fundamental question remained: could traditional military superiority overcome criminal innovation and ruthless determination? The answer would be written in fire and steel across the waters of the Caribbean, as two very different concepts of warfare collided in what would become known as the First Cartel War of the modern era. Phase 2. The Underwater War. At 245 hours, the USS Colorado's sonar arrays detected multiple contacts approaching from the Venezuelan coast. What followed would redefine submarine warfare for the modern era, not against a traditional navy, but against criminal submarines operated by narco-terrorists with nothing to lose. Contact bearing 270, range 8,000 yards, reported sonar technician First Class Rodriguez. Multiple contacts, moving fast and shallow. These aren't traditional submarine profiles. They're smaller, more maneuverable. Commander Chen studied the tactical display with growing concern. Intelligence had briefed them on Cartel submarines, but the reality was more sophisticated than expected. These weren't the crude narco subs typically used for drug running. They were purpose-built attack vessels, armed with torpedoes and mines, designed specifically to challenge U.S. naval forces. The first engagement occurred at 22:03 hours when a Cartel submarine launched 2 torpedoes at the USS Paul Ignatius. The destroyer's sophisticated anti-torpedo defense systems engaged immediately, launching countermeasures and executing evasive maneuvers. Both torpedoes missed, but the message was clear. The cartels possessed weapons capable of sinking U.S. warships. Commander Chen ordered the Colorado to attack position. "Make tubes 1 and 2 ready in all respects," he commanded. "Target the lead submarine contact." The Virginia-class submarine's advanced sonar systems tracked the cartel vessel as it attempted to evade. But the criminal craft's smaller size and shallow operating depth made targeting difficult. At 22:17 hours, the Colorado fired 2 Mk-48 heavyweight torpedoes. The first struck the Cartel submarine amidships, breaking it apart in a massive underwater explosion. The second torpedo targeted a supporting vessel, achieving another kill. But celebration was premature. Sonar immediately detected 4 more contacts approaching from different vectors. What followed was the most intense submarine battle in American naval history since World War II. Cartel submarines, though individually inferior to U.S. boats, operated in coordinated wolf packs using tactics learned from military advisors. They exploited shallow coastal waters where American submarines had difficulty maneuvering, while launching waves of torpedoes and mines to disrupt the invasion fleet. The battle raged for 3 hours. The Colorado sank 5 Cartel submarines, but was forced to surface after suffering damage from a mine explosion. 2 Cartel boats escaped, but not before laying additional minefields that would complicate amphibious operations. Phase 3. Amphibious Assault. At 04:30 hours on August 31st, Marine landing forces began their assault on cartel-held beaches near Puerto Cabello. The operation immediately encountered resistance unlike anything in recent U.S. military experience. Criminal fighters employing military tactics without regard for civilian casualties or international law. Colonel Martinez watched from the San Antonio's command center as the first wave of amphibious assault vehicles hit the beaches. "Contact front," came the radio call as hidden cartel positions opened fire. But these weren't conventional beach defenses. They were suicide fighters concealed among civilian structures, using human shields and improvised explosive devices. The Marines adapted quickly, but the ethical constraints of operating in populated areas limited their firepower advantage. Cartel fighters had positioned weapons in schools, hospitals, and residential areas, forcing American forces to engage in urban combat where criminal ruthlessness provided significant tactical advantages. Master Gunnery Sergeant Williams, leading the 1st Battalion's assault, reported the reality on the ground. "These aren't soldiers, they're terrorists with military weapons. They're using kids as spotters and civilians as shields. Every building could be a trap." The cartel's most effective weapons proved to be improvised explosive devices and suicide attacks. Former military explosives experts, recruited by the organization, had created sophisticated IED networks throughout the landing zones. Vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, driven by cartel fighters willing to die, targeted Marine formations with devastating effect. By 0800 hours, American forces had secured the immediate beach area, but at significant cost. 12 Marines were killed and over 40 wounded in the initial assault, primarily from IED attacks and suicide bombings. The cartel's strategy was clear: inflict maximum casualties on U.S. forces while generating international sympathy through civilian casualties caused by American defensive actions. Admiral Torres faced an unprecedented decision: continue the assault and risk escalating civilian casualties, or modify the mission to minimize collateral damage, while potentially allowing cartel forces to escape. The Pentagon's guidance was clear but challenging to implement. Neutralize the cartel threat while adhering to rules of engagement designed for conventional warfare. The solution came from an unexpected source. Local Venezuelan civilians, terrorized by years of cartel rule, began providing intelligence on cartel positions and helping identify combatants versus non-combatants. Community leaders who had been forced underground emerged to assist American forces, seeing the invasion as liberation rather than occupation. Maria Gonzalez, a former Venezuelan Navy officer who had fled cartel retaliation, served as liaison between Marines and local civilians. "The people here are not the enemy," she explained to Colonel Martinez. "They are victims of these criminals. But you must understand, the cartels will kill anyone who helps you. This is why cooperation must be secret." This intelligence proved invaluable in identifying cartel command centers, weapons caches, and escape routes. By afternoon, Marine forces had captured the port facility and established a secure perimeter, though cartel fighters continued to conduct guerrilla attacks from surrounding areas. Phase 4: the chemical threat. The operation's most dangerous phase began at 13:30 hours when intelligence reports confirmed cartel forces were preparing to deploy chemical weapons against both American forces and Venezuelan civilians. Former military chemical officers, recruited by Cartel de los Mares, had weaponized industrial chemicals stolen from Venezuelan petroleum facilities. The threat was both tactical and strategic. Chemical attacks against U.S. forces would cause mass casualties among troops not equipped for sustained chemical warfare. More horrifically, the cartel threatened to gas civilian populations in areas under American control, creating a humanitarian disaster that would undermine international support for the operation. Colonel Martinez received the warning with grim determination. "All units, MOP Level 2 now," she ordered, referring to the military's chemical protective posture. "We have confirmed chemical threat. This is not a drill." The first chemical attack occurred at 14:45 hours when cartel forces released chlorine gas in a residential area near the Marine perimeter. The crude but effective weapon created mass panic among civilians and forced American medics to treat dozens of chemical exposure victims. U.S. forces responded by locating and destroying cartel chemical weapons storage sites, but the precedent had been set. For the first time since World War I, chemical weapons were being used systematically in military operations, not by a nation-state, but by a criminal organization willing to gas its own population for tactical advantage. The international reaction was swift and universally condemnatory. Even nations typically critical of U.S. military interventions supported American efforts to neutralize an organization using weapons of mass destruction against civilians. The United Nations Security Council passed an emergency resolution authorizing all necessary measures to eliminate the cartel's chemical weapons capabilities. This authorization proved crucial as the operation expanded beyond its original counter-narcotics mission into a comprehensive campaign against weapons of mass destruction in the hands of criminal organizations.